Hello! Welcome to this 20-minute on-demand webinar where we'll not only walk you through the data showcased in our 2021 Conference Industry Report, we're going to present the story that the data is telling us. I'm your host, Tracy Grabowski, the Director of Marketing at OmniPress, and we are the publishers of this report. At OmniPress, we work with hundreds of associations and other organizations each year to help them collect, produce, and deliver their digital and print educational content for conferences, instructor-led training programs, and member publications. Here's a list of our products and services that serve in-person, hybrid, and virtual education. Now back to the report. This is the 7th annual edition of this report. Data is collected through an online survey that was conducted in December and January of meeting planners and association professionals across a wide range of industries and meeting sizes. This year, no surprise, we needed to overhaul aspects of the survey to reflect the events of 2020. But what this has done is established a new set of benchmarks that we can measure against in years to come. Let's start with a quick recap of 2020, as this really sets the stage for what we're going to see in 2021 and beyond. It will come as no surprise that one of two things happened with events last year. Either they were canceled or they were turned into a virtual conference. 53% of respondents were still able to hold their meeting in 2020, even if it was at a later date, while 41% canceled. Now, it's true that many of the conferences being held earlier in the year were more prone to canceling, but that's not a universal truth. We have some customers who canceled late year events because they felt that being in person was such an important component to the success of their meeting that they actually preferred to just cancel outright. Now, of those 53% who held a meeting in 2020, 69% went virtual. What did this first round of all virtual events look like last year? What we find in the data is that most planners tried to recreate the live experience in a virtual environment. Given how quickly we needed to change course, it only makes sense, right? We started with what we knew. And for the most part, conferences have a very consistent format. We did do some reconceptualizing of key aspects of our event, though, such as networking and social time. But sessions really did follow a live schedule, whether truly live or simulated live, where the presentations were recorded ahead of time but broadcast at a specific time with the speaker available during that time for Q&A. And 47% of respondents featured the same amount of content as they would have at a live event. The same number of sessions, the same number of workshops, etc. Now, what did our attendees think of this first stab at fully virtual conferences? In general, they seem to have understood the extreme challenges and limitations their conference organizers were facing, and appreciated the opportunity to learn and connect in some way, any way. 41% of respondents report that their attendee satisfaction ratings went up, while 47% said their ratings stayed about the same as 2019. And a very small number, only 12%, report any sort of decrease. We asked an open-ended question on why they believed their attendee satisfaction remained the same or increased. And we grouped these responses into three common themes. The first was that the virtual format, and sometimes coupled with a decrease in registration fees, provided greater accessibility to people who may have been restricted from attending due to budget or time away from the office or family. The second is that going virtual did not appear to sacrifice the quality of the session content. Everyone pretty much felt that the conference still provided a great place for that learning and education. And the third theme was that attendees had more flexibility and choice within the schedule. So if they missed a session, they could usually go back and watch it on demand. This also gave them access to significantly more content. In a virtual format, they can actually attend all sessions or all sessions that are of interest of them, even if it was after the conference ended. And you can't do that at an in-person conference that has concurrent sessions. You're usually forced to choose. Respondents, though, did point out that while their overall satisfaction scores may have been positive, among their own attendees, there was a noticeable difference between those attendees whose primary objective was learning and those whose primary objective was networking and business development. And this included their sponsors and exhibitors. So how did all of this affect performance of the 2020 conference? Attendance results are extremely mixed. 39% saw some amount of increase, while 41% saw some amount of decrease. So almost equal amounts of increase versus decrease. And for a large percentage of respondents, the demographic makeup of their attendees was pretty much the same as well. Although we did see that 20% were able to attract more young professionals this year. Revenue definitely took a hit for many organizations. Not all, but many. 53% saw a decrease in conference revenue. And there's a concerning number, 35%, that reported a significant decrease. And what's interesting is that these decreases were seen even among those who reported increased attendance. And this is likely due to the trade-off that was made by lowering or even eliminating registration fees. So let's take just a moment to quickly recap some of the major takeaways from the past year. Attendees were happy to see events could continue on. But now that we've all got one virtual conference under our belts, they're actually going to expect to see some changes to the event format if you're going virtual or hybrid that address some of the shortfalls of that virtual environment. We know that some sponsors backed out or decreased their investments, or maybe we as the organizers decreased the investment they would need to make. Some were facing their own economic hardships due to the pandemic, while others were uncertain of the value of a virtual event. For those that were continuing their support in 2020, they're going to have to prove out ROI even more this next year. Some of our attendees were hit hard by the pandemic, and we wanted to adjust our registration rates accordingly. Some of us were unsure of the appeal or the value of a virtual event. So, in all honesty, we may have underpriced it, especially when you consider that in most cases, attendees have access to more educational content than they would have otherwise. So, given all of this, what is the event industry facing in 2020 and beyond? For starters, a lot of uncertainty. Even as of January, most planned to hold a conference, but they still weren't sure how they were going to do that. You'll see that their answers are all across the board. We go from 26% in-person, 26% hybrid, 29% virtual, and 19% haven't decided. That's a pretty close split. And it's no surprise because meeting planners are in the middle of a really tough balancing act, trying to predict what the local guidelines are going to be, balance that with what attendees are going to feel comfortable doing, with what they can deliver on given their current resources, and what attendees and sponsors will deem valuable. They have to really balance all of these to figure out what are they going to do for this coming year. And looking ahead to the future, there's a lot of talk in the industry that virtual is here to stay, but not everyone can commit to such an absolute statement. As of January, 52% believe they will continue to include a virtual component to their annual conference, whereas 42% are still unsure. Now, what we say we want in how we actually behave can be drastically different. Humans are not always logical beings. And I think that for some organizations, especially those with a global audience, they may see a more permanent value to virtual. But for other organizations, like some STEM-based associations that we work with, that in-person component is so crucial to the discussion of research and, quite frankly, to securing things like research grants that virtual may never really take off. So overall, this concept of virtual is here to stay may or may not be a universally adapted concept. This is definitely a number we'll be keeping an eye on over the next several years. For those that did expect to keep a virtual component to their meetings, they're definitely going to make some changes this year. So it's very likely that even if virtual is here to stay, as time goes on, it's not going to be a replica of the in-person event. In fact, it's probably going to look less and less like a live event, and virtual is going to evolve into its own unique format. We asked an open-ended question on the biggest change they're planning to make based on learnings from 2020. We grouped these responses into 7 themes, which include making changes to the schedule, to space out sessions, delay start times, really understanding what people are going through in that virtual environment. Finding different ways to involve sponsors and exhibitors. I think a lot of people indicated that they just didn't feel like those virtual exhibit halls delivered a lot of value. Creating programming that's just for the virtual attendees because they can't get some of those other interactions in person. Increasing communication to everybody involved so they know exactly what to expect and how things are going to work. Increasing training to their staff and their speakers so they feel comfortable with the format and with the tools. And a big one that came through is to really simplify. Don't worry about over-engineering the virtual component to the event. Again, it cannot replace that live event, but if we looked at it as a complement, then what might that look like in the future? As we've also discussed, the industry is facing some major challenges coming out of 2020. Now, what's really interesting is that according to the data, meeting planners seem to be putting more emphasis on closing their existing revenue gaps by increasing attendance rather than increasing sponsor revenue. We asked them what their number one goal is for their 2021 conference. And just as it's been for the past 7 years, the top goal is still increasing attendance. And what's interesting is this year we've actually seen a decrease in the percentage of respondents who are looking to increase sponsor or exhibitor revenue. Now, this may be due to the fact that meeting planners seem to be less certain of their ability to deliver enough value for sponsors and exhibitors in the coming year. We asked them to select their top challenges, pick all that apply, and delivering enough value to sponsors and exhibitors was the most common challenge. Now, there are also some clear opportunities that were presented in the data. Namely, the fact that conference content could play a bigger role in delivering value to attendees and sponsors and generating revenue outside the event. In the report, we asked a series of questions about the availability, accessibility, and use of session content before, during, and after the event. An overwhelming majority made their session content available either before the event or right when it started. But only 59% kept it up for at most 1 to several months. Now, this could signal an opportunity for some organizations with content that have a longer shelf life. Keep it up and keep it accessible for more than just a few months. We have some customers who maintain a year-over-year library of event content that just keeps growing. And this could also provide additional exposure for your sponsors as well. The good news is that many of us did provide access to this content to a wider audience outside of our conference attendees. and 54% did charge for this access. On the flip side, however, 43% didn't. Now, couple that with the 21% who don't provide broader access to conference content at all, and you're looking at some potentially untapped revenue opportunity for many organizations. It's possible for organizations to expand the audiences they provide access to their content for a fee to help narrow that revenue gap from 2020. Now, we have been asking this question, whether respondents plan to reuse the content from their conference every year for the past 7 years. Just a few years ago, it was common to see session content sort of come and go with the conference. Nobody really used it for anything else. But over the past 3 years, we had been seeing a steady increase in the number of respondents who are reusing their conference content for a variety of reasons until this past year. This is the first time that we're seeing a decrease. So from 72% last year to 48% this year. So we're not sure if maybe it's because everyone is so heavily tasked with just figuring out the logistics of how to deliver their conference, leaving less time for activities such as repurposing that content. But for those 48% who are repurposing their content after the event, they're really maximizing that content more than ever. In the past, it's been primarily used for promoting the following year's conference. But this year, a lot more organizers are looking at revenue generation and attendee value. So this brings us to opportunity number 3, which is to do whatever you can to repurpose your event content. Because doing so can check a lot of boxes, like generating additional revenue, attracting more attendees to satisfy that attendance goal mentioned earlier, and it can be a way to give your sponsors and exhibitors more exposure to a wider audience. It's also a lot easier to do this with a virtual conference because all your content is already in digital format. And here's a little bonus opportunity. If you're going to make this content available after the event and repackage it and repurpose it, be sure it's optimized for search engines so that other people can find it at the moment they're looking for resources. We have another on-demand webinar that covers this exact topic, providing examples of why it's so important, the simple steps you can take, and which free tools you can use to help you. You'll find it on our website, omnipress.com, under resources, and then under webinars. So, to summarize everything we just covered, if you walk away with anything today, it should be this. We're really not sure if virtual truly is the future of events, the way some folks in the industry are stating. To be honest, it's probably going to vary by industry or by organization. But if it is here to stay, virtual is likely going to look less and less like a live event the way it did in 2020. And as time goes on, it's going to evolve into its own unique format and structure. Be careful not to undervalue the virtual components of your event because they absolutely have value, even if that value is different than a live event. And this value includes the fact that you can get more longevity out of the content and that attendees have access to more content at your event. And look to your conference content as a source of additional revenue and value because it can help you achieve several of your strategic objectives outside the event, which include revenue, include attendee engagement, include attracting new audiences, especially if it's optimized for search engines, and can even include learning retention. That is it for today. If you're interested in keeping the discussion going, feel free to email me directly or connect with me on LinkedIn. And for more content and learning, visit omnipress.com/resources for blog articles, white papers, and webinars. Thanks.